4 out of 24 are wrong. That's actually pretty good. That means 20 out of 24 for right. You guys did pretty good. I don't feel too bad about this. I was kind of worried about it. Means you guys must have done some reading. Why is number A, letter A, the answer that it is? You don't have to remember the Yalta Conference. It's nice if you happen to choose. Does anybody know when the Yalta Conference was? The beginning or the end of the war? The end. But let's pretend it was the beginning of the war. Or the end. Who's not going to be at any of these conferences?
Franklin D. Roosevelt.
No, he's going to be there. He's the president. Who's totally not going to be at these conferences? Hitler. He's the bad guy, right? If he's at the conference, what do we probably do?
I blame you.
Arrest him, right? I'm so sorry, Eli. Obviously, I tricked you, but not really. So we have the Allies.
Oh my God.
And then we have the Nazis, the Axis powers. And so who are the Allied powers? Well, England first, and then France because they got in the war first. Then the U.S. got in the war, right? And then for the Axis powers, we have first was Germany and Austria, although technically Italy gets into the war first. And well, in fact, if we want to be really technical, Japan gets in the war because they start fighting in 1931 when they attack China and Manchuria. But these are guys, all the Axis, these are all the Allies. Is this really all the Allies and all the Axis? Do you know how many people ended up fighting on the Allied side?
Probably quite a few smaller people that don't get much recognition for it.
A lot of smaller people that don't get much recognition. I'm going to take this number out of the top of my head, and I'm probably wrong, but I think it was something like 151 different nations. Okay, but that's not who's really fighting. I shouldn't say that. That's not who is organizing and directing the effort. So who is actually doing most of the organizing and the directing of the effort?
The big three.
Yeah, well, U.S. eventually, but they don't get into the war until 41, so who's in charge mostly in 39 and 40?
England.
Yeah, why? Why not France?
They were taken over.
Because they lost, right? So, not the best person. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that they're not involved here. And in fact, there are people associated with all of these guys during the war. Do we happen to know their names? Some of them you should know. Who's the obvious one for us? FDR. Okay, that's an easy one. He is there all the way through the war. After VE Day, which means what? Victory in Europe. But not at VJ Day. Who is president at VJ Day? Truman. Okay, so there is another conference that happens after Yalta. So he's at Yalta, which is right around the time of VE Day. Okay, and then the VJ Day. So we have the Eastern Front and the Western Front, and then the Pacific. The Western Theater, the Pacific Theater, right? Truman is there. That conference is called the Potsdam Conference. And FDR isn't there because he's dead. Otherwise he would be there, right? So who other names do we have associated with this? England, you should remember England.
Churchill.
Churchill, boom. We all love Churchill. The guy came a movie out here, but even if you didn't see the movie or know about the movie, you would have known his name, hopefully. The French guy, nobody remembers. You do, actually. If you ever go to France, the airport is named after him.
Charles de Gaulle.
Charles de Gaulle, that is it. So de Gaulle. So he is the guy in France. So these are the names. Now what about these guys? Hopefully this isn't too difficult. Who's our guy in Hitler? Not really our guy. Did I say our guy in Hitler? Yeah. Who's our German guy? So that's not a surprise. Austria-Hungary? Trick question. Why?
Because they took them over?
Yes. What do we call that? When Germany takes over Austria, what did we call that? You might not remember. I may not have used the word when I was doing that recording, but does anybody know? When Austria and Germany united, what did we call that? It is annexing. That is what it is, but that's a description. They actually called that annexation. They had a name for it. Anybody remember? Anschluss. That's what it was. The annexation. So, trick question, Hitler's on both of them. What about the Italian guy? Mussolini. Finito Benito. Mussolini. And then, I don't know, you might know this. Who's the Japanese guy? What was it? Emperor Hirohito. I think it's with an I, Hito. But, it's not really true. If you take world history, I explain Japanese history a little better. The Japanese emperor is fascinating. Is the longest dynasty in the world. And what does a dynasty mean? A ruling family. The longest dynasty in the world. We're talking probably 1,500 years. Now, how does that happen? You didn't take Western, you didn't take world history. Nobody's taken world history with me. Okay, I'll just tell you. Around the 1200s, Japan removed the emperor from power. Not from authority, but from power. Do you know the difference? Authority is your right to rule. Power is you're forced to rule. So the emperor remains the spiritual leader. It's hard for West to understand this because Japan is very heavily involved with Shinto and kind of animism. The emperor really represents Japan. He's the office of the emperor goes way back, even before the emperor was emperor. There was a shamus, and I don't know if you understand the term of the shamus, but that's the kind of the priest who is the conduit between the unseen and visible world and the visible world. And so that was always the leader. Humiko, it was the name of the first leader, wasn't an emperor at that time. But that idea has stayed within Japan up until the first emperor. And the problem was that when you're an emperor that actually has power, you end up having people not like you, and you get infighting. And so what Japan did relatively early is that they created a shogunate. And what is a shogun? Kind of a general. It's the military leader. And so the Baikufu was the 10th city. Basically, by around 1300, certainly by 1600, it was absolutely set in stone. The Tokugawa era, that's what did it. So the military leader is the one that actually runs the country. And the emperor then doesn't ever have to get into those physical daily things. And that way their family can continue to always be the leader with the authority. So ideally, the shogun is acting off of the authority of the emperor, but in fact, they're removed. So when we say the Emperor Hirohito, does the Emperor Hirohito really dictate what's going on with World War II? No. Emperor has not really been involved with Japanese politics for probably 800 years prior to this. So then, who's the head of Japan? They don't have a prime minister. It's really a military council. Because they don't have shoguns anymore either, because they became kind of an imperial. So the imperial council, or the military council, it's one of the last examples of an aristocracy. But it was a military aristocracy. And if you think about this, the whole concept of the shoguns, the samurai, they've been in a military aristocracy for a very, very long time. This is a military aristocracy in the 20th century. So all of these folks kind of have names associated with the leaders. And it depends on what type of government you have. So FDR is a president. He's not a dictator. He had to be elected. So he's elected, right? De Gaulle was elected. Churchill was elected. In fact, very interesting thing about both Churchill and FDR. What happens almost immediately after the war? Well, no, I guess not both of them. FDR is dead, so he didn't run, he didn't lose an election. But what happens to Churchill? He loses the election. He gets booted out. they get somebody else. And it's not because they don't like Churchill, they like Churchill, except Churchill is a wartime prime minister. When war is over, what do they want to do? Not be thinking about war anymore. In fact, and we'll talk about this in a second because it fits in with our discussion of the Cold War, Churchill gets booted out because Churchill wasn't supportive of a socialized state. And England became a socialist country almost immediately after the war. You can explain to me why that happens. France became a socialist country fairly quickly. De Gaulle kind of rolled with the punches. He stayed in there. The United States did not become a socialist country. Okay, in fact, quite far. What about Hitler?
You got it.
Well, he's dead, so he's not going to be there. He did get elected. He did get elected when? In 33. He was elected. And that is actually important to know. Because sometimes we assume that he, took over from the beginning. But that meant that at one point he was saying things that German people liked. Now there is a point that once he gets elected, he began to slowly dismantle the election system. So by the time we get to 1936, there are no elections. And certainly by the time the war starts, there are no elections. But it is important to recognize that he was elected, which means he does represent Germany. What happens when he dies?
And later they start to change things.
Well, yeah. Yes.
Go the Allies to dial up Germany.
Yes, we're going to talk about that specifically. This is what the origin of the Cold War is really going to start off. What is the goal? Unlike World War I, when in World War I, remember, it was the German people that overthrew the Kaiser. They had a revolution, and then immediately they surrendered. So it could have been, I shouldn't say would have, it could have been possible for the Germans to say, that wasn't us, that was the Kaiser's war. That's not us. And it could have been possible during the Treaty of Versailles for all the European nations to make that agreement. That wasn't Germany, that was the Kaiser, that was the empire. We're going to transform Germany so that it's no longer an empire, but it's a democratic country. And so they don't have to pay anything or accept guilt because it wasn't them, it was the Kaiser's fault. They could have done that, but they didn't. And who was most upset that they didn't, aside from the German people? But who else was most upset that they didn't? The United States. It's one of the reasons why we didn't get involved. Instead, we said, Germany did it. I don't care that you overthrew the Kaiser. It's you guys that did it, so you guys have to pay. And from the American perspective, it looks like the League of Nations is just yet another tool for another empire to try to impose its will, so we're not going to have anything to do with it. Well, in World War II, what happens when Hitler dies? Do we force Germany to pay for all the pain for World War II? This is where the United States is just different. It's American history. You must be able to see this to explain what happens after. And I'm going to promise you, I am a minority among historians that continue to offer this. But I'm actually really big on looking at what people said that they were doing in 45, 46, 47, 48. I don't think it's ever a good idea to talk about what people think in 2019 and project it onto the 40s. I think it's frankly unfair. But it happens a lot. In most of the interpretations that we see that's going on and what's talking about the origins of Cold War is from people in 2019 talking about what they value and what they think is a good idea and how they look at the world, and then they project that back onto 44 and 45. But if you read anything of what people are saying in 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, it doesn't reflect anything about our modern historians. So I'm just going to warn you. What I'm explaining to you may not be easily found in your textbooks. Maybe you will, maybe not. If you get an older textbook, it's more likely. Because what I'm telling you is not unusual or unique. It is what the people at the time were saying. Okay? At the time, okay? The idea was that when the war is over, we will try not to punish Germany, because there's no winners or no losers. If you have winners and losers, then you set up war as an acceptable tool for the future. If these guys win and then they get stuff, then why not have another war to win more stuff, right? But if you make sure that there are no winners, there's no losers, you just fix everybody, then you can try to remove the incentive for war. So not only do we try not to punish Germany, and the United States is largely heading this, but the United States does something that wasn't done in World War I. Who paid for the war in World War I? Germany, after the fact, right? And was this good for the German economy? It was horrible. Right? They didn't have any resources. They were really not even allowed to start their resources because they were constantly under debt. So after World War II, who paid for a great deal of the war of World War II? What did we call that? You guys read about the Marshall Plan in your textbooks? $13 billion. Now, $13 billion doesn't seem like a lot today. Well, it's a lot. The thing is that we have billionaires that have, people have $40, $50 billion. Nobody, countries didn't have $40 or $50 billion in the 1940s. Most people, most countries didn't even have $1 or $2 billion. So $13 billion is shockingly high. And that's what the U.S. pays. For what reason? To rebuild Europe. And why would they do that? To prevent World War III. Does that make sense? Now this is really, from an ideological perspective, it does not fit pragmatism. Did I use these two words already? Pragmatism. Pragmatism, you do what you need to do in order to get it done. This is clearly what we're seeing on this side of the fence. Hitler agrees to the Munich Compromise because that stopped people from attacking then. He's just buying time. Later, he takes over all of Czechoslovakia because he could, and nobody was going to stop him. So it didn't mean anything. It was just a slip of paper as far as he was concerned. That's pragmatism. Pragmatism is the end justifies the means. Pragmatism. You do what you need to in order to get the right end, result. What's the opposite of pragmatism? Well, you could say that, but you don't have to be altruistic. You can just be ideological. So in our individual, we talk about morality. And there's certain things you don't do, moral code. But where do you get a moral code in a country? Who's the guy who violated the moral code if you've got 300 million people in that country? It's hard to be thinking about that. So we think in terms more of ideology. Now there is another way of describing this. If you have a moral code, that means that there are certain laws that you don't violate. That make sense? I'm not going to steal the candy from the little baby, even though I could. I don't, because it's wrong. I don't break that law. So we usually think of this in terms of rule of law. And for the pragmatism, if you do whatever you need to get it done, we usually say rule by might. And if we look at these two sides, that's the biggest difference. And if you remember, the reason why the United States doesn't join the League of Nations is what were we afraid the League of Nations would become? A tool for rule by might. So then we said no, we weren't going to do it. Now you could disagree and whatever, you could say there's perceptions, people were wrong, that's fine. But we had a very strong perspective of what was right and what wasn't. And it goes back to our very reason to exist. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. This is a law. The essence of human rights assumes that there is a law. If you don't believe in an ultimate natural law, you don't believe in human rights. Because why not do anything you want to do? You have to assume there are some things you can't do, even if it's legal. Now this becomes a big issue. I mentioned World War II is an ideological battle. Where do human rights come up in the events of the story following World War II? And you have to probably read my mind here, because there's a ton of events, and unless you're thinking about it, it's probably not going to come up. But there is a particular event after World War II that is strongly associated with human rights, and it really distinguishes the pragmatism from the ideology. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I'm going to say the word, and then I'm going to see if someone can add it in. First of all, does anybody know? I'll give the first chance to guess. Go ahead. Okay, very close. But the Holocaust occurs during the war, and clearly, this is pragmatism. This is not rule of law, right? This is doing what I can in order to get rid of people that might weaken me. But the world was shocked by the Holocaust because it violated virtually every principle of morality. So what did the world do after World War II because of the Holocaust? Anybody know what the Nuremberg Trials were?
Where all the war criminals went to get sentenced or executed?
Close, very close, like 93% close. They were being tried for crimes against humanity. Okay, I know that this is a fun card game, joke, ha ha, but it's a very serious thing. Crimes against humanity. What does that mean in plain language if we're looking at these definitions? What is a crime against humanity?
Crimes that violate human rights.
That's exactly what it is. It's a crime that violates basic human rights. Why is slavery illegal everywhere? And it doesn't mean that people don't do it. People break the law all the time, but it's illegal everywhere, especially after World War II, but even before that. Why? Is there any country that legalizes slavery? No. Because it goes against the concept of human rights, of life and liberty, and pursuit of happiness, all three of them. You cannot enslave people. This violates human rights, even if the country votes on it and says we can. You can't round up all the people you don't like and then systematically execute them. That's a crime against humanity. Even if you got elected and the people say it's okay, they pass a law saying it's okay to round up these people and it's okay to kill these people. The folks that were being tried for the Nuremberg Trials for crimes against humanity, what was the number one defense?
I was told to do it.
I was told to do it. That was the law. I was actually not breaking any laws. It would have been breaking the law if I didn't do this. I was ordered to do it. That was the law. I did what I was ordered to do. Did that defense work? No. Because that goes against higher laws. Certain natural laws that you can never break. Or if you do, it's always wrong, no matter what country and culture you're in. It's wrong. It's against humanity. After the war, these are big things, and for the most part, even though a lot of these ideas stem not just from the United States, But if you go into world history, U.S. History 101, it's Scottish Enlightenment ideals. These are the things that pushed constitutionalism in England in the 1600s. It was some of the basis of the ideas behind the French Revolution in 1789, at least the first half of the French Revolution. These concepts of democracy, constitutionalism were a Western idea. The United States had the advantage of having a group of people that were removed from Europe, removed from the context of feudalism and titles of knights and lords and all that type of stuff. And most of the people in the United States were also literate. So we just grabbed on to these Enlightenment ideas. It's not untrue, nor is it uncommon, to describe the United States as the child of the Enlightenment, because it was born right then. And so these are real principles. And so it's from this justification, when the war is over, we're not going to have winners or losers, we're not going to divide up spoils. That just leads to more war. And in fact, who's the biggest winner in the Allies? The person that was the leader of the winning side. The United States. And who paid the most money for World War II? The United States. And not just for the Marshall Plan, but continually. Who was it that funded most of the defense for the English and the French and everybody on during the Cold War? Why is it that England was able to become socialist after the war? What didn't they have to spend as much of their money on after the war?
Rebuilding the public works.
Military. Because who was providing a great chunk of the military protection? The United States. The United States could not be socialist because we put our emphasis on the technology and in the military as well as civic works, private enterprise. But England could and France could. This is genuinely a new world order. And I mentioned that in the last class.